So I hope it's possible to interact. Can they ask questions or can respond to my questions?
Yes, sir. Definitely, sir. Definitely, that shall be welcome, sir. So, so nice of you. Whenever you ask questions, they are encouraged to unmute themselves and rather respond.
Sure.
So I think we may start. So,
Okay. Then let's start. So you have a program on sustainability engineering, sustainable construction materials, I'm told. And I have been asked to speak on a, a related topic, a topic which is much neglected.
sir,
And I'd like to,
sir, just to
yes,
sir, just to intervene you. My dean has joined, so I request my dean, Professor Anil K. Mathur, sir, to welcome you, sir. Professor Anil K.
sure,
Mathur, sir.
sure.
नमस्ते सर.
Namaste.
माथुर साहब अपना
So,
माथुर साहब
I
वीडियो ऑन
can
कर
see
हाँ,
the topic is very interesting and it may be useful for everybody. That is sustainable happiness. So till now, Praveen ji has arranged many technical lectures on sustainable development. Now it is sustainable happiness. Probably it is a very new topic for me and maybe for others. So we welcome you.
thank you,
Kindly
sir.
continue, sir.
Thank you. He specifically asked me to speak on something related to happiness and Indian wisdom. So I'm going to combine the two. So as you all know, sustainability is the buzzword. Everybody's talking about it because the fear is real. People are talking of the tipping point where life as we know it on this planet Earth may no longer be sustainable. And you can already see efforts being made to try out other planets, to go to outer space, to check out Mars and Moon. It looks like it's not enough that we have polluted and made unsustainable our own planet Earth. We now need to do it to other planets. But perhaps that's not quite the approach needed. So we begin by asking a very basic question. I want you to give your answer. Question is very simple. What do we really want in life, work? Anybody can answer? Just unmute and say the word.
Well, sir, happiness.
What happened?
yes, sir. Now your video has come again, sir.
I think I somehow it got off.
Sir.
So I need Can you?
So it is echoing. We are able to hear you, but the system is the voice is previously it was okay, sir, when you started.
Can you share the screen?
Uh, no, sir. You can share screen as you had done previously, sir.
I think some
सर आप
some.
दो सिस्टम से कनेक्टेड है सर, इसलिए इको आ रही है.
Sir, I
Okay, let
think
me-
there are multiple windows open, sir, of you. Multiple windows. So you are joined twice, sir.
Okay, let me close. Let me close.
Now it is okay,
Can
sir.
you
Now
now see? I'm sorry. Okay, let's.
PPT is visible, sir.
So I got an answer to my. One answer was happiness. Any other answers? What do we really want in life? Yes. Any more answers?
Happiness,
Yes, I heard that.
Satisfaction.
Satisfaction. Okay. One more.
fulfillment,
Fulfillment. Okay.
peace,
Peace. Okay. These are the normal answers we get, but they reveal one thing. What do they reveal?
passion,
They reveal that right now we are not happy. Right now we are not satisfied, not fulfilled, not at peace. Otherwise, you wouldn't really ask for it, isn't it? So, happiness, which is the popular answer, the kind of happiness that we enjoy is clearly unsustainable. So, perhaps a more accurate word for it would be fulfillment, but it's a spectrum where we often find ourselves on the despair side. So, you can see the range of rainbow colors from despair to fulfillment. Sometimes we are close to despair and occasionally close to fulfillment. Now, some of us actually mean success. There's a big difference between success and fulfillment. Can you tell me what the difference is? What is the difference between success and fulfillment? Anybody?
So when we have achieved our target, then we are successful.
Right.
But being successful doesn't mean that we have that fulfillment in us.
Okay, thank you.
Whereas,
Thank you. Yeah, so I've asked this of many young audiences, and sometimes young people come up with amazing replies. So one of them said, success is achieving something that other people have defined as the target. Like passing an exam, getting a promotion. So success is defined by society. But fulfillment is something that is within us. It's our personal fulfillment. And we may not be satisfying somebody else's definition of success. Now, most of us know what it means to be successful, but the happiness we get out of that often doesn't last. And I would say this is because we are locked in a way of living which could be called an ego-centered living, and a living where you are oscillating between success and fulfillment is what I would call a soul-centered living. And in our Indian wisdom tradition, the word they used for operating in this zone is, the Sanskrit word is ananda. Ananda is not happiness. You could probably say it is sustainable happiness. It is the ultimate peace. Some people say Ananda comes from stillness, so you could say it is peace in motion is happiness, and happiness when it is still is Ananda. Now, the reason why we are not happy, why it's not sustainable, is because of this myth that happiness lies in wanting and getting more. It's interesting, the word wanting in English also means that we are short of something. He is found wanting. A statement like that means he is lacking something. And we are all like that. For example, when we begin life, we want to achieve things, we want to get good employment, we want money, we want name and fame. So we all have something when we start. So let's draw a line like that and say, I have these, but then I'm always looking outside the line, looking at what other people have, and I also want to gain those things. So whatever is lying outside that line which I desire, I want. Then so I struggle, I work hard. I earlier have a bicycle, now I have a scooter, then I have a car, then I'm not happy with the ordinary cars, I want something flashy, etc., etc. And so we struggle and we work hard to get these, but always the line keeps shifting. Have you noticed? Always the line keeps shifting. We are not satisfied with what we have, and we want something which is beyond. It is this very impetus which can sometimes have dangerous consequences. I get, I see other people are getting married, and so I also get married, and it's wonderful after the honeymoon. But then I should be enjoying life with what I have. It's not good if I look outside, look elsewhere. But it's that human tendency to look outside, look elsewhere, which actually brings suffering. So a good question to ask is, so the difference between two people is only in terms of how much they have, but what is common to both is they both want something else, something more. What the hell is that? What do we finally want? That's a good question to ask. And then nobody has a clear answer. And George Bernard Shaw had this nice quote. He said, there are two great tragedies in life. One is not to get your heart's desire, and the other is to get it, because after you've got it, you'll again feel bored and tired and you want something else. Research has shown that once our basic needs are met, further income and possessions add remarkably little to our well-being. Very important to understand this. It's important to talk of these things when we are in survival mode. Once our basic needs are met, looking further down the same road is not going to add to our well-being. So we are like caterpillars, which are becoming fatter as we get more money, more fame. We become obese, more wealth, more projects, more services, more fame. And in the academic context now, we should say more papers, more citations. But we are not really happy. This is not good enough. And also it's unsustainable, as we know all too well. The caterpillar was meant to evolve into a butterfly. It's a metamorphosis. And this is what we need to discover. High sense of purpose, a vision, a joy in action and in staying quiet. Originality in expression, care and concern for others, to be creative, to be aesthetic, to be wise. That is something that is not much there in our education and in our learning. We have to figure it out ourselves. I want to give you a quote from someone called Bob Moorhead, who is a pastor. He talks of the paradox of our age. Now, this quote goes back 30 years. 1995, it's the description of America, of the developed country, now overdeveloped. And let's see what we can learn from this. We have taller buildings, but shorter tempers, wider freeways, but narrower viewpoints. We spend more, but we have less. We buy more, but we enjoy it less. We have bigger houses and smaller families, more conveniences, yet less time. We have more degrees, but less sense. More knowledge, but less judgment. More experts, yet more problems. More medicine, but less wellness. We have multiplied our possessions, but reduced our values. We drink too much, smoke too much, spend too recklessly, laugh too little, drive too fast, get too angry quickly, stay up too late, get up too tired, watch TV too much, and pray too seldom. We've learned to make a living, but not a life. We've added years to life, but not life to years. We've been all the way to the moon and back, but have trouble crossing the street to meet the new neighbor. We've conquered outer space, but not inner space. We've done larger things, but not better things. We've split the atom, but not our prejudice. We plan more, but accomplish less. We've learned to rush, but not to wait. We have more weapons, but less peace. These are the times of fast foods and slow digestion. Tall men and women, but short character. Steep profits, but shallow relationships. More leisure, but less fun. More kinds of food, but less nutrition. 2 incomes, but more divorces. Fancier houses, but broken homes. Now, this has been development. This has been the Western model of development, which they realized is unsustainable and something is missing there. What is missing? Because we seem to be following exactly the same model. Would you agree? We're doing exactly what they're doing. But maybe we should wake up and see something is missing here. What is wrong? What is missing? Why are we not happy despite all this development? What's the root cause? And what is the implication in education? Can anyone suggest? Anybody? It's actually mentioned here. Our focus is on outer development. We've conquered outer space, but not inner space. And that is missing in our vision. So let me go back to an Indian mystic, Kabir Das. You would have studied this in school, Kabir's Dohas. Kasturi Kundal Base. The musk deer carries its fragrance within itself, in its intestine. The species of deer. In Tamil, we call this species Kasturi Man. Mrug Dundhe Ban Mahi. And the deer in the poet's imagination can also smell this fragrance, but it runs all around the forest searching for it outside. Jo ghat ghat Ram hai, duniya dekhe na. Likewise, divine happiness, sustainable happiness, is within all of us, but the whole world fails to realize it. What a lovely, insightful understanding. Something that is actually the essence of what I wish to convey in today's class. Beautifully expressed by Kabir Das. So let's begin with some stories. So here's this picture of the famous Taj Mahal. And the story goes that when it was being built by laborers who were cutting and assembling marble stone, someone was walking down the road and looked at a laborer and asked him, "What are you doing?" Now, this person, being an ordinary laborer, barely looked up and he answered, "Can't you see what I'm doing? I'm cutting stone." Correct answer. Then the visitor noticed that many of them were cutting stone like that, half-heartedly, not really interested, till he chanced upon another laborer who was doing it completely differently. This person had a radiance about him, a smile, apparently enjoying everything. And when he picked up the stone, he would lift it up, and when he brought down his chisel or hammer to break it, it would break into two pieces, and he would put one down gently and lift the other up, smile, and then put that down as well. And so the visitor asks the same question, "What are you doing?" And he gives a fantastic reply. He says, "I'm building the Taj Mahal." Apparently the same work being done, but with a completely different inner orientation, with a different vision. And this analogy, these two extremes actually depict how we live our life, all of us. Are we just cutting stone, half-heartedly, mechanically, without putting our heart or soul into it, just to make a living? Or do we have a vision? Are we building a Taj Mahal? I mean, if so, what is that Taj Mahal? So there are different ways we do work. Many of us are teachers here, so we often teach, and students also attend classes. Sometimes it's too boring, too challenging for them to attend. There's no motivation to attend. There's no joy. There's no effort. It's a lethargy zone. It's what we call tamas. Tamo guna is predominant. Then there is the zone where we are motivated by desire. The joy depends on the external reward. This is how the corporate world operates. The effort is driven by self-centered desire. And we struggle hard to succeed, to beat others. This is what is sometimes called the carrot and stick approach. This is rajas, rajoguna. And then there's this sattvic way of doing things, conscience-driven motivation. Joy comes from within, it's being morally right, and the effort is driven by, say, the greater good. This is a goodness and excellence zone. But there's something higher, gunatita, where we can't help doing what we do, intrinsically motivated. The happiness, the bliss is here and now. It's beyond the demands of the ego. The work done is really effortless. We're in a flow state. This is what we call the mastery and fulfillment zone. People who operate here will understand easily what is implied by sustainable habits. Now, Stephen Covey, the author of the famous 7 Habits of Highly Effective Living, after 30 years in research, came up with a book called The 8th Habit, where he focused on people who were living such lives of total fulfillment, very few in number, and he found out that they seemed to have 4 unique qualities. First, they all had a vision. When they wake up in the morning, they are driven by the vision. Okay, so I'm giving an example of the Taj Mahal. Next, they are disciplined. Okay? They take care of the physical health, emotional health, the mental health. They do their yoga, they do their meditation. And discipline is usually a bad word, especially for students, because it is enforced by others. But for such people, it is self-discipline. They do it by themselves. You know how important it is, for example, in music. The sadhana demands that you do it, and initially it could be difficult, but after some time, you feel something is amiss if you don't do it. Okay? The same is true when you are used to physical exercise. You enjoy doing it. The third quality is passion in the sense of exuberance, fire in the belly, an energy to do, and it's a phenomenal amount of energy to do what you want to do. And it doesn't depend on age. You can see this example in Abdul Kalam, a former president. Even at that extreme age, he was full of passion for what he did. And fourthly, you could say soul or conscience. It is that which gives nobility to the vision. Otherwise, you could have a Hitler-like vision. And when these four are in full flow in any human being, you get sustainable happiness, you get fulfillment. And they belong to four different dimensions. What happens is one then becomes a creative force in the world. You will find your voice, your true voice, your svara, and you will naturally inspire others to find their voice. You become the ideal teacher. You become a whole person. You become integrated. You display integrity. Integrity here literally means the gap between what you say, what you think, and what you do is minimal. And if someone points out any disparity, you will be the first one to accept, wish to correct it. You will be inspired and a source of inspiration wherever you go, whatever you do. That's a great ideal. But we find that such people are very, very rare. In fact, Kavi himself in his study did a reality check, and this is what he found out. Despite all our progress and technological development, most people are not thriving in the organizations they work for. They are neither fulfilled nor excited. They are frustrated. Now, that's a very strong term. They have no clear vision. They are bogged down and distracted, and they don't feel they can improve much. Many of us are here, and it's so important to get out of this space, to find that inspiration to keep us going. So what went wrong? The first sign that something has gone wrong is when you find yourself complaining instead of giving the world a vision. So it's so convenient to play the victim. And victimhood becomes our pastime. Then instead of self-discipline, we start indulging. Instead of having a passion, we become like everybody else around us. We reflect the social mirror. Instead of being governed by our soul, we are governed by our ego. Instead of being a creative force in the world, we are just like everybody else. Cultural software. Instead of finding your voice, you would have lost it. And instead of inspiring others to find their voice, you will conspire to prevent others from finding their voice. Instead of being a whole person, we become fragmented. And we display a clear lack of integrity and lack of inspiration. Here's a quote from a lovely book called Leadership and Self-Deception, which we follow in our course here on self-awareness. Why do we fail as a group? People who came together to help an organization succeed actually end up delighting in each other's failures and resenting each other's successes. Does this sound familiar? We withhold information and resources from one another, try to control one another, and blame one another. When I'm blaming A or B or Department X, Y, Z, and suggesting that all our problems will be solved if only they straighten up, I'm doing it because their shortcomings justify my failure to improve. So here's an honest confession. What begins as a conflict between two persons spreads to a war between many. Finally, organizations are filled with people whose energies are largely spent on sustaining collusion. Look at the smile on the face of the Dalai Lama, whose birthday it was yesterday or so. The Dalai Lama, when asked what surprised him about humanity most, answered, man, because he sacrifices his health in order to make money, then he sacrifices money to recuperate his health, then he's so anxious about the future that he does not enjoy the present. The result being that he does not live in the present or in the future. He lives as if he's never going to die and then dies having never really lived. This is our story. Let's look at it from this perspective, from the perspective of stress, emotion, and physiology. On the x-axis, we have high performance, where we are fulfilled, where we feel good, positive emotions. And on the left side, we have poor performance, where we feel negative emotions. In the y-axis, we show the times of the day when we are expected to work, daytime, high energy, high arousal, and evening when we are meant to relax, low energy, low arousal. The medical people have a term for this. They say inside our bodies we have an ANS, an autonomic nervous system. When it is switched on, it's said to be sympathetic, and when it is switched off, when we want to relax, it's said to be parasympathetic. So if you're on the green side, you are balanced. Sympathetic ANS with balance or parasympathetic ANS with balance. But if you're on the red side, we are hyper-sympathetic, over-sympathetic when we are aroused, and when we are meant to relax and take rest, we are actually sympathetic. We start behaving like computers, which originally had a good, efficient hard disk, but after some time, everything slows down, and when we really are challenged to do something, the system hangs. That's because we've never been able to switch off programs that are running in the background. And it's important to heal the system. It's so important to reboot the system. Self-awareness helps us understand our physiology, our psychology very well. Otherwise, we need help from the doctors. They can take a blood sample and they check whether we have a stress hormone called cortisol and so on. So what are some indicators of healthy living? Well, on the green side, when we are aroused, we feel exhilarated, we feel passion, we feel joy, we feel love. And we're not talking here of love towards human beings or sentient beings. We're talking about love for everything, for the kind of work we do. We have a sense of care. We have kindness. We have a sense of appreciation, of harmony, of beauty. And when we go home and take rest, we have a sense of inner peace. We have equanimity. We have a sense of acceptance, forgiveness. We have serenity. We are able to reflect. Basically, we are filled with contentment. It's a wonderful way to live. And in this graph, you can be anywhere from 0 to plus infinity. But on the other side of the graph, we can be anywhere from 0 to minus infinity. And so, on the flip side, when we are aroused, we could be frustrated, angry, hostile, fearful, worrisome, anxious, feeling guilty, feeling overwhelmed, feeling resentful, always judging people. And when we go home and take rest, we can't really take rest, we are restless. There is a sense of hopelessness, of despair, a sense of depression, feeling burned out, feeling fatigued, feeling withdrawn, feeling bored, feeling cut off from everybody, apathetic. I have a question to all of you. We meet so many people. Most people whom we meet, are they on the green side or are they on the red side? Quick answer.
Red side.
Okay, red side. So I won't ask the next embarrassing question, where are we? But if we are intelligent, we should realize that's the wrong place to be, both for ourselves and our families and our students and the whole world. And so we must be doing something wrong to consistently get pushed onto the right side. There are some dysfunctions in us which we need to get rid of. And we need to take inspiration from those around us who are consistently on the green side and nurture those qualities. If you ask me, this is the most important thing we can do in life. And the earlier we do it, the better. So there was a psychologist called Maslow, Abraham Maslow, who, unlike his predecessors, was not interested in the study of sick people, or people who are neurotic or psychotic. He wanted to look at healthy people. And he was very keen to know what is it that makes them so healthy. They are the examples to follow in education. And he came up with what he called a hierarchy of needs, which is pyramidal in its shape. At the bottom, we all have these 4 basic needs. Physiological needs, which we share with animals, body needs. These have to be satisfied. Okay, but there are not too many. It's not difficult to satisfy them. But human beings are different from animals, and we have safety needs. We need money, not for today. We think of tomorrow. Animals don't think or worry about tomorrow. And that keeps us engaged. We want safety and security. And even if we have enough of that, we need a sense of belongingness, a sense of love. We want to share our lives with others and be loved. Even that is not enough. We need a sense of name and fame, status, esteem. These are common needs for all humanity. Maslow went so far as to say esteem is also of 2 kinds. There's a lower self-esteem needs, where we are craving for recognition by others. There's a higher self-esteem need, where we are free from that and we get a sense of self-confidence. That's where we shift. That's a huge shifting line. And below the line, we have what he called deficiency needs. And above the line, we have what is called growth or being needs. Here we seek knowledge for the sake of knowledge, not knowledge to get a degree, to get name and fame, but knowledge just to satisfy our curiosity. We engage in art exactly for the same purpose. Our whole life becomes a play of art. There's something special that evolves in us and plays out. It's a sense of aesthetics. And as these develop and grow, Maslow used a term called self-actualization. We become self-actualized. And this is what he said, a man must be what he is meant to be. This is when we really fulfill our inherent potential and we find fulfillment. And beyond this, and this is where he visited India, he said there are higher needs beyond this. There are spiritual needs, which he called meta needs. And this takes you to a higher plane of sustainable happiness. And that is called self-realization. Now, people are either at the pre-conventional level, conventional level, or the post-conventional level. Pre-conventional is like in the case of children, and we want to make them conventional, which means we want them to satiate the deficiency needs to the extent possible. But people who go beyond the conventional, even conventional people are afraid of, because that is post-conventional, that is unconventional, and they are not really able to discriminate between pre and post at that stage. But it is the post-conventional people who really become self-actualized, and that is waiting to unfold in us. And in Maslow's words, such people display transcendental maturity, which enables people to learn, to live, to love, to relate, and to play in far more fulfilling ways than the so-called norm. Normal is conventional. And if you want to talk of life purpose, here is our own life purpose, which we identify, something called Swadharma in the Bhagavad Gita, where you don't wait for somebody else's declaration of what you do to be happy, because the doing and the being itself is self-rewarding. And at the highest plane, we have this ideal of self-realization. Our rishis were operating at this level. That's what teachers are meant to realize. And only at this level can we talk of sustainable happiness. Now, in the Kathopanishad, there's this beautiful distinction between two paths in life: the path of prayas, which is all short-term needs, instant gratification, and the path of shreyas, which is what is in our long-term true interest. Unfortunately, the current model of development is focusing on prayas, more of everything, more money, and so on. But it really doesn't give you the happiness that you really want. So we need to correct ourselves. The turning point comes when we realize, when we've gone horizontal direction, we realize that we've gone beyond need and we've gone into greed. Greed is not a place where we get really what we want. We need to outgrow our lower needs. We want to tap into our higher needs. And then we discover a sense of abundance. And as someone said, abundance is not something we acquire. It's something within us, something we tune into. And it is here that we really encounter sustainable happiness. This is very, very important. Sustainable engineering and all that is often at the lower level. We make a big mistake, because even that is meant to give us happiness and well-being, but it does not, because we are looking outward for our happiness, whereas the happiness is something which is inner. A great Indian, Gautam Buddha, he saw this straight away when he was very young. And he talked of the noble truth of suffering, because he took this to an extreme. He says everything is suffering. Birth is suffering, aging is suffering, sickness is suffering, dissociation from the loved is suffering. Not to get what one wants is suffering. And in his words, it all comes because we are looking for our happiness depending on things that are all unsustainable. The body is unsustainable. The mind is unsustainable. Possessions are unsustainable. Relationships are unsustainable. Name and fame is unsustainable. So if you are running after those things, you will not get sustainable happiness. In his words, anityam anityam sarvam anityam. Anityam means ever-changing, not lasting, not sustainable. And as a result of which, dukkham dukkham sarvam dukkham. So if you want to step back and look at how we live our lives on a daily basis, we want happiness, we are seeking it, and where do we look for it? Typically, we look for it in objects, in things, in substances, in activities, in relationships, and in states of mind. I say seeking or resisting because some objects are attractive and some are Some people also are repulsive, so you want to avoid such things. This is our daily project. And yes, we often do succeed. But why are we seeking? We are seeking because of a sense of lack, of a sense of deficiency, of a sense of unease. Or as the Buddha bluntly said, out of dukkham, out of suffering. We struggle hard and we do get happiness, but it doesn't last. It is anityam, it is temporary, and then we are back to square one, and then the whole cycle goes on. And the word in India that we use for this is called samsara. This merry-go-round, or more accurately, sorry-go-round, is how we live daily. And we've never really bothered to ask, is this the best way to live life? Is there a way out? Why is it so this way? What is the root cause? If you want to tap into Indian wisdom, the root cause is said to be ignorance. Now, it's not just in India. Throughout the world, world literature is full of this. And the American poet writer Henry David Thoreau said this: the mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation. Look at the choice of words. Quiet desperation. So it's more accurate to refer to our daily project not as pursuing happiness, but as managing despair. Because despair is what is sustainable. The root cause is said to be avidya, ignorance. And so it's necessary to awaken from this. Otherwise, we are caught in this trap. In the Indian wisdom tradition, its signs are very simple. 3 things. 1, a constant desire and attachment. It's called raga. So we need to be free from raga, which means we need vairagya. The second is we don't get what we want, and we get what we don't want, and that gives rise to ill will, dvesha, anger, hatred. All that comes part of. If you have raga, you'll have dvesha. It's 2 sides of the same coin. And there's a third, which is bhaya, which is fear. So raga, dvesha, bhaya are the characteristics of samsara. The liberated person is free from these. And truly speaking, we are free all the time. Let's say we go out for a walk. Here's a lady going out with her dog for a walk. What does the dog see? Hopefully the dog is not yet spoiled and conditioned. The dog will see what it sees. It sees the landscape, the trees, and the bright sun up ahead. What does the lady see? Modern lady, well, she sees everything but that. Okay? Because her mind is full of problems, children at home, everything is breaking down, and there's so many things to be urgently done. So the mind is full and she's not being mindful. You will find people with sustainable happiness have all the time in the world to be free from obsessive thinking. Look at this beautiful sight. And we are losing more of this because of our greed and development. We are losing our ecology and our landscape, but we still have a few places left, and it's nice to live in such places. In fact, educational institutions should be ideally located here, because teachers and students should live along with natural habitat and enjoy life, see the power of awareness. And here's a lovely quote from Jiddu Krishnamurti, who emphasizes a lot. All his educational institutions were located in such places. One may be surrounded by great beauty, by mountains and fields and rivers, but unless one is alive to it all, one might just as well be dead. So really, sustainable happiness is not something very difficult. It's out there. And sometimes our so-called development has taken us away from this raw sense of power of beauty that is there in life. I'm reminded of a story. Okay, maybe I'm running out of time. I'll tell the story later, maybe during the question answer session. So there's a book that was written, I think, in 2004. Stop Sleepwalking Through Life. It's a textbook in our course here. There's a Hindi translation if you're interested. Brahm se jago, sone walo. So actually, life is beautiful. Just look at the sheer radiance around us. You need an empty mind to soak it all in. It's all there. It's beautiful. It's a background space of clear and present awareness. When you're soaked in this, there is nothing to do, nowhere to go, nothing to become. There is no other. And so there's nothing to fear. There's deep inner peace, infinite timeless. So one of the challenges that we all have, it's truly a movement towards a spiritual way of living, is to move from the ever-changing to the ever-unchanging. Move from the outer world of manyness to the inner world of stillness. And you find expressions from all over the world focusing on this. This is the secret to sustainable happiness. Sitting quietly, doing nothing, spring comes and the grass grows by itself. I sometimes tell this to my PhD students. I say, don't work too hard. Relax. Let the best come from within you, from effortlessness. Poetry is written not forcibly, it just flows. Imagine your thesis is already over and see how it unfolds from this moment onwards. That's how all great works of art are done. So there is a lot of action, but there's no sense of doership. Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow, nor do they reap. Observe how the lilies of the field grow. They do not toil, nor do they spin. Here's the most cryptic phrase from the Bible. Be still, know that I am God. Here's a lovely quote from Eckhart Tolle, which says, when you lose touch with inner stillness, you lose touch with yourself, you lose yourself in the world. There's a big difference between being unhappy and seeking happiness and slogging and struggling, doing something which somebody else said is important and trying to get that happiness. Fulfilled people are already happy. They've discovered happiness in their innermost being. And when they do work, they are just expressing that happiness, that sense of beauty in all that they do. That's a lovely way to live. So how do we do this? Well, it's good to recognize, first, let us take up work that we are good at. Okay? So you are naturally skilled in doing it. It comes second nature to you. It's your svabhava, natural talent. Then you may be good at many things, but there are a few things that you love doing. When we say love doing, you don't feel the time pass. You can do it at any age. You don't need to make money out of this. You just love doing. That's where the passion is. And third, more subtle, more difficult to discover, it is where your inner calling truly is. This is where Swadharma and Swabhava in the Gita is pointing at. What you know to be your true inner calling, and this is different for each one of us. So it just flows from that place. And lastly, you may be good at many things, you may love doing some of them, and you may find your true inner calling, but unless it is of value to people around us, to society, to the environment, it really doesn't give fulfillment. So for a fulfillment, all these four things have to flow. But if we end up with jobs where we are really not good at, or even if we are good at, we don't love doing, and it's not a true inner calling, and it's really not helping, not adding value to society. And here also we have to be very clear. See, many people assume that you add value to society when you, say, publish a paper in some remote journal. No, it might add value to your citation index. But how is the common man helped? What India really needs, its requirements need to be addressed head and hands and heart on. And those are the values we need to nurture and discover. And anything that is done should be of very high quality. Quality means doing it right when no one is looking, not just to please other people. So let me give you an example from engineering, from something that we did. See, in civil engineering itself, there is a real need out there in our own country. People need housing. People need clean water, sanitation, need infrastructure. What can we do about it? It needs clarity and sustainability. So since the topic is also sustainability engineering, this probably fits in, so I'll show you a little video. Just listen.
All right, now some news from Chennai, where the IIT Madras has designed an extremely affordable house that's strong or weatherproof and above all environment friendly. It's an Australian technology which uses the glass fiber reinforced gypsum. Gypsum is an industrial waste that's available in plenty, and the construction cost just $12.50 per square foot. But for more on this, let's go across to NETV Sam Daniel, who's at this house in IIT there in Chennai. Sam, tell us more about this much needed technology, cheap housing for the poor. And when can we expect this to become on a mass scale?
Absolutely, Garg. In fact, I'm right outside that particular house designed by IIT Madras to provide housing for the poor, millions of poor people who don't have a roof over their head. It's looking just like any other house, but the only difference is it doesn't have bricks. It has prefabricated panels, reduces concrete usage. It's very quick. In a month, the house would be ready. I'm joined to tell us more about this by Professor Bhaskar Ramamurthy, the director of IIT Madras, and Professor Devdas Menon. Thank you both for joining us. Research and development is one thing, but unless the private builders take it up, it's not going to become popular. Are they signs? Is it promising enough to attract private builders?
Yeah, we believe that the level to which this technology has been brought, in terms of taking care of all these issues, getting it certified by a national organization that gives a certification for such technologies, setting up the production units and so on. I believe we have reached that point, but you are quite right. Finally, there's a lot of work to be done in getting this accepted. And once, they talk about something going viral, once there's an acceptance, it will grow very fast. At that time, we'll need factories set up for these panels almost in every state so that the cost of transportation is reduced. So there's a long way to go. But I think this is not at a prototype stage or a proof of concept stage. This is at a stage where it's ready to go.
So coming to you, do we have enough amount of gypsum available for this kind of a technology?
We have. Actually, the fertilizer industry waste itself is around 40 million tons building up annually, but we have many other sources of gypsum. So I think for a long time, we can sustain with this kind of construction.
Today, the Prime Minister's advisor is launching this. How long do you think it would take to make this popular, to really reach that mass housing stage?
Shouldn't take too long. I think we're already talking to potential private sector builders. What we need really is a large number of plants all over the country. And we need also trained workers to correctly build it. And IIT Madras, we've been working on this for the last 10 years. We hope to provide that support to facilitate this construction. We hope this will be a game changer, addressing the tremendous housing shortage, especially for the poor people.
For a common man to understand, tell us very briefly, so how does it work? You have panels of wall-like structures which you bring and just assemble it.
Well, in a normal house, you use bricks, large number of them. You have to put mortar, join them. There are lots of weak locations. It's a mess. You have to plaster everything to cover up all your patches. You don't need to do all that. This is all factory made. The panel comes 12-meter long. You can cut it down to sizes. You have to erect it properly. And the innovation done by IIT Madras is the same panel can be used as a floor, as a staircase. You have to intelligently fill it with concrete where required, provide reinforcement where required. You can use it for single story, 4-storied is perfect, and 8 to 10 stories. No beams, no columns.
Thank you so much for your time, both of you. So certainly it's the need of the hour, many would call it Gargi, but we'll have to wait and watch how the government popularizes this, whether the industry will really accept it and take it to the common man.
So this is the kind of research we've done. These are the PhDs who work on this project. All the hostel buildings at IIT Tirupati were, for example, built with this. Now 2 Bureau of Indian Standard codes have been released on the construction and the design using geofence. Let me end by saying that Ananda is really felt within, but it always expresses itself outwardly. There's this lovely story about Tansen, Emperor Akbar. You know that Tansen was one of his Navratnas, great singer, classical music. One day Akbar asked Tansen, look, you sing so well. Who was your guru? I'm sure there's much to learn from him as well. He said, my guru's name is Swami Haridas, and he's a true master. So Akbar said, well, summon him to the court. I want to listen to him. Tansen says, he's not the type who will visit courts like me. He will not come. Then Akbar says, then I'll go and listen to him wherever he is. Because Akbar was a great patron of music and the arts. And Tansen said, he may not entertain you. Akbar says, no problem. Let me go in disguise. He used to love to do that, go incognito and move around in the masses. But he pulled Tansen along, and they made a long and arduous journey to, I think, somewhere near Vrindavan, where Swami Haridas was living in a cave quietly. So Tansen goes in, and Swami Haridas recognizes him, and he also recognizes that the person behind him disguised is no ordinary person. Tansen says, look, he is the Shahenshah, Emperor Akbar, and he just wants to hear you sing, that's all. Could you please oblige? Swami Haridas doesn't say a word. Tansen tells Akbar, look, I don't know, he may not sing at all. Akbar says, no way, I'm not going to leave this place. So he parks himself also in the cave along with Tansen, and they wait. They wait 3 days. No response from Haridas. On the 3rd day, early in the morning, Akbar wakes up to the sounds of melodious music. It is Swami Haridas in full flow. He sings so beautifully and so melodiously. He is in a reverie. He sings for a couple of hours. And everybody is in a trance. When Akbar breaks out of the reverie, he wants to rush and touch the feet of this master. But by the time he reaches there, the man had disappeared. Tansen says, look, that's my master. He doesn't want any reward or applause from anybody. But he obliged, and I'm so grateful. Now let's go back. So they go back. And when Akbar is in his court, he can't help but feel the echo of this music playing in his mind every now and then. So once he announces, he says, Tansen, I'm sure you know the same song. So I am going to request you to sing this song in your own way tonight in the Darbar. Tansen says, but you will compare me with my master, and I'm no match for my master. Akbar says, that's exactly what I want to hear. I want to hear you sing as well. And so ordered Tansen sings, and he sings beautifully. I couldn't help compare you with your master. I'm sorry to say you are no patch on your master. Tansen said, I take that as a compliment. If I'm a singer, my Guruji is music itself. Then Akbar asks, what is the secret? What makes him sing like that? He says, the big difference is, I sing because you order me to sing. You are the Shahenshah and I'm your subject. You give me money, I'm obliged to you, I have to sing. But Haridas is not like that. He is free. He doesn't sing. It's the divine that sings through him. That makes the huge difference. So that is a demonstrable example of what sustainable happiness is all about. Here is another example of sustainable happiness. You can see how simple his room is. He used to live in this room. Dr. Abdul Kalam. Look at what he has, he holds dear. He was a vegetarian. It was by choice. He used to play the veena. And look at the symbols that he held sacred. He's got a book on science by Carl Sagan on top of that desk. And on the floor you can see Sri Aurobindo's Life Divine. Simple living, high thinking. And this is what he said. Difficulties in your life do not come to destroy you, but to help you realize your hidden power and potential. We are all born with a divine fire in us. Our effort should be to give wings to this fire and to fill the world with the glow of its goodness. So I end with, since we are all teachers here, the real difference between a teacher and a guru. The teacher serves as a means for your livelihood. The guru helps you find and fulfill your life purpose. That's a huge advancement. The teacher helps you develop your mental intelligence. The guru helps you awaken and develop, puts you on the road to material success. The guru puts you on the road to self-realization. The teacher helps the world in its outer development. That's where your sustainable engineering comes in. But the guru points to the inner as a key to all development. That is sustainable happiness. So it is that Swami Vivekananda put it accurately and said, education is the manifestation of the perfection already in man. So arise, awake, stop not till that goal is reached. I just give you one last video. So that was also a demonstration of creative use of sustainable construction materials, all recyclable. So I end with my last slide. This is a classroom at IIT Madras, absolutely green classroom, but I'm sure that none of these agencies will give any award for it because you need to have an expensive structure, ideally with glass and with sensors and all kinds of stuff to get a platinum rating. But in the olden days, this is how classes were conducted. Okay, and so we talk about here in this class, for example, on sustainable happiness. There are 2 courses offered at IIT Madras. One is called self-awareness, the other is called integral karma yoga. And there's a book we follow called Spirituality at Work. And we offer a program for engineering college teachers. Once a year, 100 of them show up at our campus. Week-long program called Self-Awareness and Higher Goals in Education, SAGE. We've not had it now because of the pandemic. So that's all I have to offer to you. I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Awakening session, I should say, and I invite my participants to interact with the learned speaker and our mentor, Professor Devdas Menon sir. Any of the persons attending this session may kindly unmute yourselves and raise a question directly, a query. Many young people, most of them are very young, so they are requested to air.
Namaste, sir.
Namaste.
I am Mansi.
Yes.
Sir, I have a question on inner calling. Sir, how do we know what our inner calling is? Is it something that comes to us naturally when it is the right time? Is it like something we find by divine will, or is it something that we have to strive for?
Obviously, it's not something you have to strive for if it's something intrinsic. So it's a very good question. There's only one answer. You'll know it when it comes because then the flow is effortless. But to recognize it, you need to connect with your innermost source. In our tradition, we talk of the Antaryami. Have you heard of the word Antaryami? The inner
Yes, sir.
Well, once you're in communion with that, then it unfolds. You will know exactly what it is. It'll show, it'll reveal itself. And when you engage in it, it's like a fish in water, effortlessly swimming. So it is not what other people say it is. For example, all youngsters are brainwashed into thinking that there are only 2 things they can do in life if they are academically okay, to be an engineer or a doctor. That's not it. But it will reveal itself. The key is to go inward. See, our whole life is focused on looking outward. And we have not done the sadhana of looking inward. So we have to go within and it will reveal itself. I can't say more than that. Does it make sense?
Thank you, sir. Sir, it makes sense, but it's like I have a question that entails from the previous question.
Mhm.
Right now, I am unable to introspect or look inward, which you are indicating. How should we go about looking inwards and finding, extracting that from within?
Okay, so you're right, because we are all programmed to always look outward. And that's when we get lost. We get lost in the world outside. There's a voice in our head which keeps talking, and we don't realize that there's another true way of living. So I want you to do a small experiment, okay? Close your eyes. All of you, just close your eyes for this experiment, 1 minute experiment. Imagine you're in a very dark room. So dark that even if you were to open your eyes, you can't see anything. Let's say there's nothing to see, there's nothing to hear, there's nothing to smell, there's nothing to touch, there's nothing to taste. So the body is not there. It doesn't work. But then the mind is always active, and so there are these thoughts which are going on non-stop. Imagine that they also quieten down. So there are no sensations, there are no perceptions, there are no thoughts, there are no feelings. What is the one thing that you are sure of in this condition? Tell me. You're not introspective. You're just being who you are. What is the one thing that you are sure of? There's nothing out there. Tell me. Yes, Mansi?
Yes, sir.
What are you
So,
sure of? Completely sure of? You don't need anyone to prove it to you. You're sure of it. What is it?
sir, so being in that moment, in that experiment, I was just sure of that I was feeling lighter. And
Okay, wait. There's no weight and all that. I'll put it for you. You were sure that you exist. Am I right?
yes, sir.
The only thing you're sure of is I am, and I am aware. Agreed?
Yes, sir.
So, did you use your mind? Or did you introspect to arrive at this, or it was just spontaneous?
Yes, sir.
So, you see, you don't need the body or the mind to access your true self.
All right.
You are. This is what we call the Atman. This is Atma Bodham. And the more you tune yourself and awaken to that, you will get all the answers you need. So you want to know one way to access, I've given you the easiest way. In Tamil Nadu, we had a great master here called Ramana Maharshi. Have you heard of him?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so he used to always pose this to whoever came to him with questions, especially people who had a lot of problems. And he says, you say you are suffering, but who is suffering? So if you trace yourself to the source, first of all, the very fact that you can see your own suffering shows that you are not the suffering, because the subject is always different from the object. So when you can trace back to your source, you'll find you'll always come to this point of absolute stillness. And there's an immediate recognition you're already free. You're already complete. Did you not feel totally at peace?
Yes, sir, I will.
And if you tune yourself to that, you'll find that that is always available, and that is the only sustainable thing there is in the whole universe. This is not me saying, this is what all the rishis have said. But it's not fashionable to talk of these things because you have to study, you have to work, you have to do all that other people tell you is important. And you'll find you access all this in deep sleep beautifully when there's nothing. The world is not there, the mind is not there. And so, this is the great Indian wisdom that is lost, that has to be re-accessed in our own way without making it into a religion or anything. Find this is the essence of everything. All good things there are in all religions. Okay, Mansi,
Thank you very much, sir.
thank you.
One professor has written on chat to me, I think. He wishes to ask what is the effective way to reduce stress in our routine life, especially due to official activity, mainly running behind target.
Yeah, so if you are running behind targets that you have not set, it's not a healthy way to live. So it's not your swadharma to run behind targets. So that's a very unhealthy way to live. You're bound to feel stressed. So this is, if you ask me, this is doing paradharma. That is stressful. When you do your swadharma, there is no stress. In that example, the examples I showed you, Swami Haridas singing, there is no stress. In that lady putting up that fantastic creative construction, there is no stress. There is creativity, there is joy. So one way out is, even though you're forced to do many things that you don't want to do, you must always have time and interest and freedom to do those things that you are really meant to do, born to do. So the example I give students are, let's say you are forced to study some 7, 8 subjects and they're all painful, they're all boring. But there's 1 or 2 which are really exciting. Maybe the teachers are very inspiring. So inspiring that they uplift you like anything. And when you feel uplifted like that, you'll find that you can easily handle the other subjects as well. And that clarity, that skill is something that one needs to nurture and cultivate. Okay, so once you're used to a certain level of excellence and clarity, first you will minimize the work that you take up because you can't compromise on your excellence. So you won't do mundane things. I'll give you examples in academics. We just do things because other people say they're important. Let's say you're good in academics. Stay with academics. But you'll find that everybody will say, no, you have to be a dean, you'll have to be a director. But that's all administration. That's a different path. That may not be your cup of tea. But that is getting more name and fame. So you get lost in that. So you end up doing so many things that you're really not meant to do. This is the biggest mistake all of us make in life. As someone once said, life is too hard to do things just because somebody else said it's important. That's our biggest cause of stress. Thank you.
Any other attendee or the participant wish to get clarification or queries answered by sir? May I kindly ask?
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Pravesh here from the college Ajmer. Sir, I want to know that there are 2 things in everyone's life. One is social expectation from everyone, and other is inner happiness. So, should we balance both or not? If we if we should balance both, then how can we balance both?
See, what do you mean by social expectation? That is very difficult because different people expect different things from you. For example, I would expect you to find sustainable happiness. Nothing else I will expect.
But sir, like family expectation, social expectations, at least you should get a government job, something like this, and that.
Those are all open invitations to sustainable misery. I'm being very blunt. Nahi bhai, you have to wake up. Just because everybody's... See, you have to ask only one question. All these people who are giving me suggestions, are they awakened? Are they living life of fulfillment? You'll find that they are not. Most are not. See, those who are bound will always bind you to them. Those who are free will always give you that freedom. This is a secret. So yes, in the beginning, to follow what you clearly see as the path to freedom and fulfillment might mean, not complying with other people's expectations. But once you start living that life, they will all turn around and say, you did the right thing. So it may be difficult, but then you must know whose advice you're going to follow. Ideally, the advice should be your own antaryam. But if not that, seek a guru who has your best interest in his mind. See, there is no personal agenda here. True love is not expecting you to do what I want. It's to give you the freedom to do what you truly want. But the big question is, what do you truly want? That is where you need to go inward. That is the question which was asked earlier. So your question is good. That's a dilemma most people have. But you spend your whole life, you waste your whole life trying to satisfy other people's expectations, and you'll never succeed. See, government job. What the hell do we mean by government job? It means a safe job where you can do anything you want and collect as much money as you can from under the table and nobody can throw you out. That's not a good job. See, if you really know who you truly are, you don't need anything. And need to quench your deficiency needs. Surely you need to do that. But you need to outgrow them and keep putting this goal on top of all other goals. Unless you do that, you're going to be just like everybody else. You saw the spectrum of red and green. Most people are in the red, and that's where you'll end up unless you do something different. So change comes from within. You make the difference. People will see you as different. Family will wake up. Student will wake up. College will wake up. Society will wake up. And you will be the role model. But if you follow the path of other people who are living unfulfilled lives, you'll end up like them. So it's all up to you. Nobody else.
Thank you, sir.
Yes?
Such a nice reply. Thank you, sir.
This one professor.
Any more questions?
Yes, one professor has written again. He is shy to ask directly from you. He is asking that.
Dr. Praveen, shall I complete the story I wanted to started off with, but I thought I didn't have time?
Yes, sir. Kindly, sir. Kindly, sir. Kindly complete the story, sir.
Dr. Praveen?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You kindly complete the story, sir.
Hello?
Sir, I am getting your voice. I am getting your voice. I do not know whether you are getting my voice or not.
Hello?
Definitely complete your story, sir. You are getting my voice, sir? Sir, you are getting my voice? You may kindly complete it.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'll just finish that story and then we'll close.
Yes, sir.
That was a story I put in Stop Sleepwalking Through Life. This is a scene from the Amazon forest. So once there was an American businessman who went on a holiday to the Amazon forest. He was accompanied by an interpreter, and they went by the river and they saw a tribal person, semi-naked, sitting quietly by the banks of the river, looking at the landscape. After some time, obviously he was feeling hungry, it was breakfast time. He just put his hand inside the waters and he pulled out a fish, a trout. That was his food. So he waited for the trout to die. Then he pulled out a knife from his waistband and he cut it up and he ate it. Then he dipped his hands back into the water, washed himself, and again went back to his favorite pose of gazing into the distance, totally happy. Now, this businessman was very curious because he had never seen anything like this. He was not curious about the peace and contentment of this man, but the way he caught that fish so effortlessly. So with the help of the interpreter, he asked that person, "Can you do that again? Can you show me how you catch the fish?" So this person asked, "Are you hungry?" He said, "No, I just want to see." So he again puts his hand into the water and this time he brings out a much bigger fish. The fish is trembling in his hand. And then after some time, he let it go, put it back into the water. Real sustainable living. But the American businessman said, "Why did you do that?" I said, "Do what? Why did you put it back into the water?" He said, "I've already had my breakfast." I said, "No. Imagine the way you're able to catch the fish. If you just work 8 hours a day, think of how many fish you can catch." But this man just didn't understand. He said, "What do I do with all that?" He says, "You can sell them." Sell them for what? He says, "You can make a lot of money." He still didn't understand. He said, "What is money?" So we don't know how that story ended, but it's quite likely the Westerners brainwashed him and he ended up like all of us. But it just goes to show you how so-called foolish understanding of development, of expectation, is completely at crossroads with sustainable living. So that's a very profound story. I hope you like it. So that's it. Any last question?
Professor Sudarshan wanted to ask something. Professor Sudarshan, you may kindly unmute yourself.
Hello.
Namaste.
Sir, good evening, sir. I am Dr. Sudarshan.
Yes.
Sir, I want to ask you one simple clarification. It is not a question. You have proved that GFRG is one of the low-cost and sustainable concept, and it is also implemented in some of the places and some of the states. But
Yes.
why not? It was not adopted in all over the country.
Well, someone has to get into it. You're most welcome. That's a business proposition. We are only creators who can get into that. So you're right. But it is definitely sustainable and it's making use of waste material.
Yes, sir. Yes.
So that is a project that you could possibly, people are working on it.
Okay, sir. Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Any other participant or attendee wish to air his or her query? Professor Mathur sir is here. Mathur sir, you wish to speak anything, sir? Anil Mathur ji?
Sir, I had one question.
So,
Sanchit ji, yes.
Uh, Sir, you said about that we should not follow those who are already bound by the shackles of the society. I wanted to know if we are surrounded by those people only who we should follow. Like we can be venture too far from the right path if we are not having any role model to follow in the end.
yeah, so I'm not saying anything. I'm not saying you should not follow because you're already following. All I'm saying is question, look inward. You will know what is right and wrong. I already showed you a secret of getting to know your true self. Knock inwards. You will know what is the right thing to do. So it's not a question of following any A and not following B. But certainly you will be able to recognize people who are living lives of fulfillment and those who are not. That means that much intelligence we all have, is it not? People who are consistently on the green and people who are not. So definitely they are people who are in a better position to guide you than those who are in the red. Is that a fair thing to say, sir? That's all I'm saying.
Yes, sir.
Because they have your best interests in mind. They know that the conventional is not enough for sustainable happiness. It has to be post-conventional. That's all I wish to say. And all our rishis recommended the same thing. But it is true, the people who live that kind of life are few in number. They are rare. So you need to reach out to get that wisdom. And they are there in all traditions. Okay?
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
So, if there are no further queries, we may close this session.
Yeah. So thank you very much. I wish you all sustainable happiness. Thank you.
I express my gratitude on my personal behalf and from Rajasthan Technical University for sparing your valuable time and enlightening us. As rather, I am indebted to you, sir, for giving so comprehensive lecture and keeping it light. Keeping it light with examples, stories, quotes from Bhagavad Gita, Buddha, and all those things, keeping us familiar to that. And so, thank you so much. Gratitude to you, sir. We are very much grateful to you. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.